friends, you're listening to the Shattered Ceilings podcast with your hosts Stephanie and Adriana. We're here to discuss the importance of mental health from the perspective of two first-generation immigrants. Join in weekly as we dive into important topics such as relationships, parenting, and cultural barriers. Here, we get real and candid as we explore what disrupting the status quo looks like for each of us. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Shattered Ceilings podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana
and Stephanie.
And we're so happy that you guys are back. Before we start, we do want to address something.
Yes.
Stephanie.
So, we have some housekeeping to take care of before we get into today's episode. I went back and forth a lot about bringing this up, but Adriana thought it would be a good idea.
Yeah.
So, and I'm grateful to have a co-host that I can run my ideas by. So we have gotten recently some negative feedback.
Which is expected.
Yes, expected. And I wanted to say, when we started this, we were aware that we were going to get like some pushback, but you can't prepare yourself for it. And I feel like until it happens.
Yeah.
So I'd be lying if I said that it didn't bother me. Like it did bother me and it still bothers me.
It doesn't bother me because I guess I just know where we're at. I guess we'll talk about it and then.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to address it. Not because I care what people think about Adriana or I think she's in the same boat as me. We don't care really what people think about us because people always have something bad to say. Or you can't always please everybody. You can't always be best friends with everybody, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But what bothers me is the way that this show has been painted and portrayed. Yeah. Which is not truth. And that bothers me because we put a lot of work into this. So the feedback we received was that Adriana and I are very negative and we speak badly about the immigrant community, which really bothered me because, for one, the purpose of the show is not to gossip or trash talk. Like, we're not a trashy daytime talk show here. Like, the purpose of the show is for all of us to educate ourselves together.
Yeah.
So the fact that that's being said and that that's how this show is being portrayed bothers me because that's not the truth. And second, for every bad message that we receive like 2 to 3 encouraging messages. And it's a lot from younger kids and a younger generation that's like, hey, thanks for talking about this. I'm struggling with this silently. I'm going through this. So for me, I'm like the type of person that I'm very overprotective, like of my friendships. And if I see like a group of people that are marginalized, I get like very defensive of them. Yeah. So thinking that this show helps people and to have it portrayed in that light bothers me. So what I want to say is, if you or somebody you know is like saying these things, refer them to the intro of this video because I want to ask, if you are thinking like this or if you're saying these things, do some self-reflection and ask yourself, why are you so triggered by what we're saying? Like, there's a reason why it's bothering you, the things that we're talking about and the things that we're bringing up. Because even if you go back in history and look, whenever somebody tried to shake up like some things in a culture or talk about negative things, they were always attacked, which I understand. But like, if you're saying these things, then you might be benefiting from like these toxic agendas in our culture. I don't even know how to put it like in another way. So
no, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to address. We're very protective of what we do here because we know that it's helping people. We know our intent behind it. Yeah. So do you want to add anything, Adriana?
Yeah, I'll say my little bit. Again, I don't think it bothers me because we're here speaking our truth, which I want to obviously say is like what we're all dealing with. We know our intention behind this. It's to literally help people and ourselves. I benefit from this. Yeah. Another thing is, if we were really against the Romanian community or like haters of the Romanian community, we wouldn't be in the Romanian community. We both go to Romanian church. We both married Romanian men.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's not logical.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. I know there's people that left the Romanian community, wants nothing to do with it, which if that's the route they wanted to take, good for you. But that's not the way we're living. So it didn't make sense to me when I heard it. Because I was like, oh, well, clearly they don't listen to our podcast if they think all we're doing is talking bad. Yeah. We like to bring things in the light of things that are obviously toxic and going wrong. And we always want to give people like solutions. So whoever's listening, they thought that we just talk bad. I hope you actually listen to our podcast and realize we're not. And then if you are offended by some things we are saying, maybe it's just because you don't agree with us, or maybe it's because it's like hitting something. So like you said, kind of self-reflection. And I don't know. I hope, that it's helping people. And obviously we encourage any type of feedback. There's gonna be haters out there.
Yeah, and that's, like Adriana said, that's fine. You don't have to agree with what we say. That's actually normal. That we don't all have to agree with each other.
We all have different opinions.
But don't portray the show and paint it to be something it's not.
Yeah.
Because that's not what this is. So that's our little 2 cents.
I just want to make sure our audience knows that, like, we love the Romanian community.
Yeah.
We love our culture. We just want to better it. It's easy to leave. And I always mentioned in the podcast that there were times in my life where I left the Romanian community and I was annoyed at the Romanian community, but here I am. So anyways, today's topic is going to be super important and eye-opening. It's very much like an American concept, and it has to do a lot with the idea of the typical American dream and pursuit to happiness. We're talking today about the toxic self-help culture. According to some studies, the self-help industry here in the States are expected to grow $13.2 billion in 2023, which that's insane.
Is that not crazy?
Yeah.
But it makes sense. Like you said, I think it's a very American concept. I actually was listening to a podcast. It's a Romanian podcast the other day, and one of the guests brought up this self-help culture that we have in the United States. And it really made me think, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this, because I don't think we know the negative aspects of it. And I think it's really important. And we actually titled the episode, The Psychology Behind the Self-Help Movement. Yeah. So that's what we're going to try to do today. We obviously live in a society that's like super self-centered and focused on constantly bettering yourself, which is not a bad thing. But I think we can all agree society as a whole is like obsessed with themselves, their problems, their stressors, their relationships.
It's definitely very self-centered and can easily become like more selfish than good.
Yeah. So it's, like I said, it's like all around us. It's screamed at us daily on every social media app around us. But there are serious dangers to this self-help society. Like we mentioned, there's nothing wrong with seeking content and educating yourself on how to better yourself. But the thing is, self-help is not a cure-all solution. So while I was researching for the episode and going back and forth with Adriana about it, we were kind of encouraged to examine the scope of this show. And we touched on it in the beginning, but we have come to realize that our goal here is more to bring self-awareness rather than to offer any sense of like artificial motivation. Yeah. And I think we are very true to being genuine and transparent on this show, even if it's uncomfortable. So I think that that's not a factor that you see in a lot of this self-help culture.
Yeah. And I think also being Christian, it ties in with like self-help, making sure like you are enough and you can help yourself. It's like,
exactly.
It kind of contradicts what Christianity is about too. So I think that's also
love that you brought that up, because that's exactly something I wanted to touch on. Putting the psychology aspect to the side. If you are a Christian and you are very enmeshed in this self-help like ideology, it's starkly against what Christianity is, because like our self is sinful. Yeah. So
it's a dangerous route to take.
Yeah.
I think there's good that we can take from it, but it could easily become like a dangerous path to follow.
Right. So self-help in its essence makes you feel great. Like, for example, every time you finish a book, watch a video, attend a seminar, you feel a sense of accomplishment, which is normal. That's part of our human experience. If this wasn't true, then it probably wouldn't be $1 billion industry. Yeah, true. So the statistics and the studies show us that it's obviously an industry that makes a lot of money and profits from this sense of accomplishment that people get. So each time we absorb self-help content, we are actually getting a hit of dopamine, which is the happy hormone in our brain. Every time you finish a book, every time you watch a self-help video, attend a seminar, you get an instant hit of dopamine. And the problem is, like, this is when an addiction to self-help content can kick in. Yeah. If you look at it chemically. So we get stuck then in something called the illusion of progress. which is very interesting because it basically says that each time we consume that kind of self-help content, we are running the risk of fooling ourselves into thinking that we've accomplished so much when in reality we haven't taken any active steps towards bettering ourselves.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So MJ DeMarco talks about this a term called action faking in his book. So action faking is doing things that make you feel like you're making progress in your life when in reality you're not. So some examples would be creating to-do lists and calling it a day, but not doing anything on that to-do list.
I'm guilty of that.
I think all of us are.
Yeah.
Or like making business cards, but not picking up the phone to make any sales.
Yeah.
So that's called action faking, and it makes you, it's like you're doing an action thinking that you're bettering and progressing, but you're not. So with the incentive to make as much money as possible, obviously in the self-help industry, the goal of the self-help culture is not focused on creating real change, but creating the perception of real change, which is crazy because that's what keeps you feeding on this content.
Yeah, it's a business.
Yeah, it's a business and it's a crazy profitable business.
Yeah.
So then we go into like, we're consuming too much, but don't have any actions to show for that. So you can be left with an empty wallet, lots of temporary motivation, but then a like sinking realization that you haven't achieved anything yet.
Yeah, and I feel like when you realize that, you even start at like a lower point than when you began. Because you're like, what was I doing this whole time?
Yeah, and they, the self-help industry knows all of the psychology and how it affects our brains, and they know exactly how to pinpoint the moment, you know, before you start consuming, and they keep you kind of addicted to constantly consuming the books, the videos, the going to the seminars.
I'm definitely guilty of that, especially when I did start my business, because you kind of need to be immersed in that in order to feel like you're succeeding and doing the right thing. So it's like that bittersweet thing of, this is helping me, but you can definitely get stuck in that race of just always
and we're going to talk about that. I think it's something our generation deals with a lot.
Yeah, which I always go back to social media. We see people's best days and their new business ideas and what they're doing, and they're always becoming their best self. So everyone starts like comparing, and they're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my life? So no wonder everyone wants self-help books.
Yeah, exactly. And without naming names, I mean, it's all around us. There are people who make a lot of money off of pushing this agenda.
Yeah.
So
buy my course.
Yeah, literally, exactly. Join my university.
Yeah, I think the older you get, or you just become aware, like, okay, this isn't helping. And again, I go back to being Christian and realizing I can't do anything without God. So
yeah, exactly. That's a great point.
Yeah. What are some negative effects of the self-help culture that you've seen?
Okay, so researching this, the self-help culture is having serious impact on our society as a whole. British journalist Will Storr, in his book that he wrote, it's called Selfie, How We Became So Self-Obsessed and What It's Doing to Us. He opens the book with a chapter on suicide. And the author, Bill Storr, is disturbed by the prevalence of suicide in the United States, and he blames like the horror and shame of failing to meet sky-high expectations that we set for ourselves. Which it's so crazy if you connect the dots like that. Suicide is a huge epidemic for our generation. Yeah. And it starts to make sense why that is. I
also just read or saw on Instagram that like suicide happens more in males than females, which I thought was also interesting.
And who's targeted so much with this health? Like, if you look at it, the demographic a lot is male too. Yeah. With the hustle culture and everything. So that's saying something. So in the book, he cites surveys that show that young girls are getting increasingly unhappy with their bodies. And actually a growing number of men are suffering from muscle dysmorphia. He interviews psychologists and professors who describe an epidemic of just horrible anxiety among university students. And that's attached to the phenomenon of perfectionist presentation. Yeah. Another thing to mention is that studies have shown that those who consume self-help books had actually higher levels of cortisol, which is the stress hormone, than their other counterparts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they tend to have more severe depressive symptoms, which also adds to the epidemic of the mental health crisis in our country.
Yeah.
So you think you're doing something good, but you get caught in this very toxic cycle where you feel like you're not enough constantly.
And it becomes very obsessive.
Yeah.
Again, I relate to this, especially when I was younger. Not that it was trendy, but I feel like in our age, from the 2000s, it was really in to be super skinny.
Oh, yeah.
Low-waisted pants,
fit.
crop tops. Like, you
Yep.
had to be thin. All the
Yep.
models. So I think eating disorders were huge in body image.
Mhm.
And all we had were magazines. We didn't even have Instagram at that time.
Right.
So I feel like our generation, at least for me, I dealt with like the whole eating disorder thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's weird now. When I grew up, I remember talking to younger girls and even my sister, and they're like only a few years younger, and they're like, "Oh, I don't feel like that really affected us." I'm like,
Mhm.
"Oh, maybe this generation changed,"
Uh-huh.
which I realized it became really in to be thick and curvy. So I was like,
And
I was born in the
self-love.
wrong generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I'm like, I hate bringing up Kardashians because they
Mhm.
don't deserve airtime, but they do influence a lot of things, the culture.
Mhm.
And now it's more in to be skinny.
Again.
And
Yeah.
low-waisted pants are coming, like
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Everything comes
style
back.
always comes back.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm seeing more girls be more open that are like 10 years younger than me that are like, yeah, I'm dealing with an eating disorder.
Oh,
I'm
no.
binge eating. So
Oh
it's
my gosh.
it's a weird trigger to me because I'm like, man, I haven't heard anyone talk about this because it
Mhm.
was kind of irrelevant. And now I get these like flashbacks of like everyone wants to be skinny.
Mm-hmm.
There's Instagram, Facetune. You see these like girls in bikinis. So I'm like, oh, I really hope the younger generation who's listening is realizing like this is not going to make you happy.
Right.
Like your goal weight is not going to make you happy.
But like you said, it's not something you realize until you're older. When you're so young, that's
That's why
the
you're
world you're
consumed in.
immersed in. Yeah. And it was interesting how the study showed that men and boys, I should say younger men,
Mhm.
deal with this like they're self-conscious about how big they are, how muscular they are. I mean, look at all the big, names out in like entertainment that talk about hitting the gym constantly.
Mhm.
You're going to make that kind of a,
Yeah.
insecurity
I went to
in that generation.
Lifetime, and my little cousin, when I say little, he's like 13,
Mhm.
okay, like middle school.
Yeah.
He's not even done growing up. Like he's
That is young, yeah.
didn't really hit puberty. I don't know what age
Mhm.
guys go through that.
Mm-hmm.
And James was at the locker room, and James still doesn't know all our cousins. There's like hundreds of us, and he's like, you guys all look the same. But he saw my little cousin like flexing in the mirror and trying to look at his abs. And this kid's like 13. Like
yeah.
he like lifted weights for a day, and he was so like, you could just tell like he wanted this dream body.
Yeah.
And James told me, and like at first I kind of laughed because I was like, oh, that's so funny. But I was
Mhm.
like, no, that's so sad. Like
Yeah.
you're 13. Even at 16, it's like, okay, go to
still
the
a
gym
kid,
for health.
man.
Yeah, like
13
you're
is still a
child.
kid. Like you're getting robbed of your childhood innocence.
Yeah, and I'm like, go to the gym to exercise, like play basketball, play sports, but like,
Mhm.
man, already being so focused. And I think that's the danger of like wanting to be this like perfect image in society. So I think
100%.
like definitely men also deal with
Yeah.
body issues too.
Yeah. And an interesting thing to note is I thought about this so much. Self-help culture also promotes a level of narcissism in this society.
Mm-hmm.
You touched on this about how very self-obsessed if you're constantly ingesting all of this information and content that pushes you to constantly think of yourself, bettering yourself, becoming a better you,
It all becomes about you.
Yeah, it's all you see. In a way, I believe that narcissism and self-obsession has been repackaged and rebranded in our society as self-love and putting yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
But it's literally textbook narcissism.
Yeah.
Like, there's no other way around that. We see it even on like TikTok or social media, main character energy. Like we are not the main characters in this universe. Like
I know.
there are other people around us,
I know.
I think it's very toxic, and it's important to take care of yourself, 100%. I believe that. But you also need to be serving others. Like that's not a life if you're only focusing on yourself constantly. And also it sets up a lot of these young kids for failure because in society, you can't not only be thinking about yourself.
Yeah, I totally
your
agree.
actions are going to affect other people as well. So
yeah, I think especially in this culture, we're dealing with problems now because people are so focused on themselves.
mm-hmm.
But again, us being Christian and going back to the Bible, God said the world will only get more evil. People will love themselves.
Yeah, that's a good
It's
point.
like,
Yeah, that's a very good
we
point.
already have pages of us
Yeah.
on the internet,
Mhm.
which again, it's you need to find a fine line and a good balance of
Mhm.
like loving yourself and putting yourself 1st,
Mhm.
but loving your neighbor and not making everything about you.
Right. I also want to touch on the topic of toxic positivity, which is heavily ingrained in the self-help culture.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in this self-development bubble, then more than likely you're surrounded by messages that encourage you to constantly think positively, get rid of negative thoughts and thought patterns, which leads you to believe that if you're struggling or you're having an off day, that you're some loser who's regressing in their development.
Yeah.
And so toxic positivity in its essence is actually a form of gaslighting.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and for whoever doesn't know what gaslighting is when someone causes you to question your own sense of reality.
Mm-hmm.
So toxic positivity can cause people to dissociate themselves from their negative feelings, rationalize unacceptable experiences, and even gaslight others in turn.
I like kind of had a little memory that just came back.
Mhm.
Obviously I'm not going to say names,
Mhm.
but there was someone I know that was very like super positive, encouraging. In a sense, it was like their purpose in life was to help others, which sounds
Mhm.
really nice. Like, wow, they're
Yeah.
really encouraging. They impacted so many people's lives, really awesome people. But again, with social media, I would know when they would have like a bad day or like be in
Mhm.
bed all day because they're depressed or
Mhm.
they weren't feeling well. And then I would be on Instagram the same day and be like, oh, they posted that today is the best day ever.
Yeah.
Like, get up. I got up at 5 and I worked out. And
Yeah.
like, it was this weird thing of like, if I didn't know this person's real life, I would think that every single day they're living their best life,
Yeah,
which
and
it's just not true.
That is so exhausting and it's so damaging to that's living a double life.
Yeah, and when I saw that, what sucked was it was kind of like their identity to be always this positive and motivating, which again is really cool, but show your bad days too because people need to see that. That's also encouraging. So that was like a few years ago, and I remember when I saw that, I was like, I am never going to believe anything I see on Instagram anymore because I literally just saw this person and they just posted something that's so opposite of their reality.
Yeah. So that's the problem because the self-help culture involves a lot of shaming of normal human experiences. So uncomfortable emotions are labeled as bad or intrusive thoughts that need to be fixed.
Yeah.
And you can't live like that as a human. Like we are going to have, moments of it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And
it's
the
human.
self-help culture, does not promote that at all.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that the self-help industry is a huge proponent for the hustle culture mentality. Hustle culture can, first of all, very quickly lead to burnout. And another issue that I see a lot that can arise from hustle mentality is that it leaves very little room for self-reflection. You're constantly going, constantly hustling. You can be hustling, but if you haven't taken the time to examine and reflect if it's the correct thing that you're hustling for, then you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
So, and then you get to that point where you look back and you're like, I've worked so hard, but I have nothing to show for it because you never took that time to self-reflect and be like, wait, what am I doing? Is this good for me? Is this the right thing?
Yeah. And especially taking a break from social media, even like family and friends, what they say, and just really soaking it in and being like, okay, what am I doing with my life? Rather than always asking people.
Yeah.
I was definitely in the whole like hustle culture in my early 20s. In the moment, I loved it, especially when you're like accomplishing things, like writing your goals and hitting it. And it was
but
so
that's
great.
The difference. You were accomplishing things. Some people get stuck.
So that's why it also you get to a point where after accomplishing so many things, when you get stuck, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing wrong? And then it becomes more like depressive.
You question literally your entire being.
Yeah,
and
your purpose,
entire,
which is crazy. Because when I was opening up my skincare business, obviously I loved what I was doing, but like that was my life. Like I knew everything about skincare. I think at the time when people talk about movies and shows, I'm like, no,
I don't have time for that.
I watch webinars on skincare. Like that was my life. And in a moment, it helped me like be knowledgeable and succeed. And I'm happy I did that. But looking back, I was like, man, I missed out on friendships, family events, even just things like hanging out with my parents. Like instead, no, I need to go do this and this.
Yeah, and that was a good thing for you, but it wasn't forever.
Yeah, so that's why looking back, I'm like, what was that?
Yeah.
That was a crazy few
Time.
years. Yeah. So it's definitely healthy to have a balance. You can be passionate about things and have goals, but not be immersed into making yourself the best ever.
Yeah.
And I feel like God's always going to humble you when you're very prideful too. So like that was always a reminder when I accomplished something. It's like, that was because of God. And I'm so thankful.
Yeah.
And that will give glory to him. And when you talk to people, you can be like, oh, that was not me. Instead of being like, oh, this is how I did it. I did this and this and this. And it's like, where was God in that?
And that is literally self-help. Like self-help culture. It's all about self.
Like I did it.
Yeah. I did everything. Nobody helped me. It's very, very narcissistic. Like I don't even have another word for it.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Yeah.
Definitely interesting to think about. So with that being said, just because we got all that info, we don't want to leave our audience obviously confused of like, great, now what should I do and what shouldn't I consume? So we do have practical tips for you. Tip number 1 would be examine the content that you're taking in and try to stay away from any content that involves unregulated advice, quick fixes, and one-size-fits-all solutions.
Yes. And I want to mention here on the show, we don't promote that. We don't promote one-size-fits-all solutions. Yeah. Everybody's different. Every situation's different. We talk about that a lot. Everybody's timeline is different. What is very important, and this is going to lead into what Adriana is saying, is self-reflection. And you can go ahead and say the second tip that you have.
Yeah. Second would be focus on what is motivating your interest and bettering yourself. Is it for you or for you to better serve others around you? Motivation is a huge factor.
Yeah. Yeah. Your motivation will tell you the intent that you have with what you're doing. So if it's only to promote yourself, you're already in the beginning stages of falling into that toxic cycle.
Yeah.
So
watch yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for me, that helps to not fall into those traps because like you said, when you watch a seminar, you read a book, you feel like, wow, I'm bettering myself. When I watch a workout video, I'm like, wow, I feel like I just did this workout.
Yeah.
Like it's so easy to like not trick your brain. But I think there was even a study when you get like a like on Instagram, you're already like happy, which it's so crazy to me. So I feel like what helped me was going through my Instagram list of who I'm following. I unfollowed a lot of vloggers because I'm sorry, their lives are
unrealistic.
That's their job to have this curated perfect life. Right. So I've like followed more people that are real, especially now being pregnant. I'm finally like, I still follow some where I'm like, okay, they have cute kids. I want to see like what they're dressing their kids in. And then I follow a few girls that literally, especially right now, I think they're pregnant with me and they're like, who else is dying? Who else has a migraine? Who else is eating McDonald's right now? And I'm like, this is my girl. Like she's actually real. So I realized what you're consuming, make it more realistic. And it just makes you feel like we're all experiencing like life together.
Right.
And it's very refreshing.
That's such a good tip. So, I like that. That's
how I felt. That's and great. Even, because I feel like with Romanians too, not that people get offended if you don't follow them back. Because it's like, we all know each other. But there were certain people where I'm like, not that like, do I really have to follow you back? But if you're not being encouraging or motivating, or if I know you in real life and your Instagram's completely different, I'm not gonna.
You can
not
choose
benefit, but I don't want to see that on my feed.
You can choose what kind of content you want to take in. So
that was my big thing that helped me because I'm on Instagram and I see obviously feed and stories, and that will slowly influence like on how you're thinking. So
that's a great point.
Yeah. With that being said, thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. We love hearing your feedback, positive or negative.
We'll take the negative feedback too.
Yes. Have a great day, and we'll see you back on another episode.